So let's talk about a really burning topic, which is how to create the right environment and develop the right skills to unlock team potential and attract new talent. It's a fancy topic. There's a lot of discussion about it. And some of them, as you will see, are kind of misguided. And I'll show you why. But before that, let me ask you a question. Because, we tend to love fortune cookies. You have a good meal, you are full, you can hardly breathe, you open it, you find the message, and then you try to find meaning in it. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together, as the African proverb says. How many of you would agree with it? Just by show of hand. 1, 2, most people. So it sounds good on a surface level. But is it always true? But what is your biggest challenge when it comes to leading or being part of a team? If you could drop it in the chat. Because sometimes an idea looks like, whoa, that's great. That makes a lot of sense until you think about it and you reflect. Because being in a good team, it's fantastic. Being in a bad one, it's better if we are alone. We are faster and definitely we go further. So what's your biggest challenge when it comes to leading or being part of a team? Conflict, different styles, lack of trust. There's less happiness now. But these are all real symptoms and all real issues. Because being in a good team is fantastic, but it's really rare. Miscommunication. Getting on with each other. Yeah. So what does it feel like leading or being part of an amazing team? Have you ever experienced it? What does it feel like? Safe, empowering, connection, synergy. Okay, so with a wide range of experiences, definitely. Feels amazing, exciting, energizing. That's the environment. How do we make it happen? Fun, great results, flow, motivating. Oh, yeah, that's exactly what we wish for. But how do we make it happen? How do we turn a diverse group into a high-performing team? That's the real question. I don't know if you see this. There was an update, I think, on LinkedIn, the Nokia CEO who burst into tears and, it went viral. And then people said, well, technically, that's not true. That's not exactly how it happened, but it's still a really good story. The point is that they didn't do anything wrong, but somehow they lost. I mean, they got both. But the advantage you had yesterday will be replaced by the trends of tomorrow. And that's a real issue because the world is rapidly changing. So who would like to avoid feeling and looking like this in the future for similar reasons? I mean, it's happening, kind of. But would you like to see the future? You see, I told you I've been bringing some magic into it. Even if it's not magic, it's technically statistics. Because the future is not that far away. So for example, 2030, we know that 85% of the jobs that will exist in 2030 haven't been invented yet, according to Dell. The world is completely changing. New jobs, you cannot even plan it. To make it more exciting, there's going to be a global shortage of 85 million workers. So it's getting more and more difficult to engage and attract people. So we have two major challenges, technology and also people. It's all changing. How do we know that? Because we do. It's science. This is what the world should look like. This is the world as an average, the demographics. It looks like a pyramid. Lots of young people and a few on top. So they're always making money to support the older ones. That's a healthy demographics. But if you look at some of the most developed countries and regions, the US, Europe, it's like a Christmas tree, which means that there are less and less people. So this is the maximum you can have, not the minimum. We know that. You cannot suddenly have millions of 20 years olds. That's the maximum. And in some countries, it's even worse. So if you look at China or Japan, they're struggling. We know where it leads to. They're losing people. So there's going to be a global talent shortage. It's predictable. Plus, the environment is changing. And that's 2030. It's not far away. So what we should be teaching leaders now to prepare for the future, that's the question Jacob Morgan asked 140 top CEOs and 14,000 employees. He got back the results and he published a book called The Future Leader. He came up with 4 mindsets and 5 skills. I changed the names a little bit based on his description. Growth mindset, teamwork, inclusion, global mindset. The skills, coaching, innovation, communication, self-awareness, and that little one there is technology. As you can see, 8 out of the 9 skills and mindsets are directly linked to how much you understand yourself and others. It's that important. It's about people skills. They are power skills. They are business skills. If AI can replace you, that's a problem. AI is not going to create high-performing teams. It's not going to create outstanding leaders, but it can contribute to their growth or decline, depending on how much they understand each other. So if we know that people skills are so important, can we improve them? Let's find the best solution. Google it. Which is the best people development solution? In less than a second, you get more than 3 billion results. You click on any of them and they would claim theirs is the best one, obviously. But let's compare that with reality. If you look at employee engagement scores, they're declining. They've been declining for more than 5 years. They are back to the level where they were 10 years ago. So clearly there's a disconnect. Companies spend insane amount of money on employee engagement programs, but the numbers are getting worse. It's not even the definition of insanity. It's an expensive scream for help. They're trying harder and harder. Something has to change. What's the reason? And I'm going to show you that. How's that possible that you can send a Tesla to the space for fun, but companies cannot improve employee engagement when they need to do it the most? How's that possible? What do you think the reasons are? Why do you think that companies are risking their future or spending a fortune on trying to save it? What's your take on it? What do you think the reason is? If you just drop it in the chat. What's your take on it? Social and cultural ignorance, short-term thinking. Yes, but they're still investing. They have the money. They don't know how to do it. Thinking based on hope, tunnel vision. What else? No idea what to focus on. Contracts. Top-heavy power structure. Okay, so we come up with a lot of reasons, definitely. Overwhelm, holding on to all things, short-term thinking. Let's have a look. Because if you think about it, a lot of leaders are struggling with this. They are leading dysfunctional teams and they want to turn them into high-performing ones. But that's also challenging. Because the world is changing completely and new challenges require new solutions. And we want to do that. We want you to be the kind of leader who can run a team, who can lead them, where the team members are proud of working for you. That would be wonderful for a change. But how do we do that? How do you want to avoid that feeling that, you try harder, something worked in the past, but it doesn't work anymore? You don't want people to think that you're just buying your time and you don't want to be found out. So how can we keep that? How can we keep our position? How can we create high-performing teams? That's the question that I also asked because I lost my first company, and that was a problem. On paper, everything made sense. I had a lot of certifications, probably the best ones. I had lots of experience, yet I lost my first company. And I didn't know why. And that's when I started my research, because I wanted to understand what went wrong and how we could fix it. And then it turned out that a lot of people are struggling with this. And based on the results, we created ICQ Global. And this webinar is about the insights, the reasons why a lot of companies are failing and what we can do about it. And also I'm going to show you the results. So now we work with a lot of companies in more than 50 countries and 200 licensed partners, including Fortune 200 companies, universities, government agencies. Technically, the niche is, if your success depends on how much you understand yourself and others, then we can definitely help. And I'm going to show you at the end a case study, a program that resulted in 400% better result than any other employee engagement programs in a Fortune 200 company. So there are three main reasons why companies are risking their future by investing a fortune in trying to save it. There is something called the dark triad of future risking solutions. I'm going to go into the details. The first one is outdated and disconnected solutions. The second one, guess and hope-based solutions. And then you have the feels good but makes no difference solutions. So now you will have a framework and you can think about maybe one of your programs can qualify for this. Some of them qualify for more than one category. The first one is outdated and disconnected solutions. They optimize something that shouldn't exist anymore because most of the leadership and management models were created by people who were born after the American Civil War in the 19th century. That's kind of crazy. That was a long time ago. We are still using those ideas to manage people because that time less than 17% of the value was created by humans. Today, it's more than 90%. It's almost like trying to fix a smart TV with tools designed for black and white ones. Yes, you can try harder, but it's a different technology. It has different challenges. It changed a lot. And also, especially if you look at big companies, they use a lot of different models, which sounds great, and they spend a lot of money, and they all have their favorite ones, but it's like speaking different languages. They just don't understand each other, and all that potential is lost. That's the issue with that. And speaking louder doesn't mean that somebody can understand you better. So there are a lot of disconnected models. Would it make more sense to have one operating system and many applications across all personalities and cultures? Would you take your Tesla to a blacksmith to fix it? It's kind of unlikely, but what if this guy is just, publishing a lot on LinkedIn that I'm so passionate about electric vehicles. I love it. The future is bright. But he doesn't have the technology. He doesn't have the expertise. He doesn't have the tools to do that. But in a way, the leadership training industry is very similar. A lot of people talk about really important topics, but they are not up to date in their field. And you might think that, no, I would never bet my future on solutions designed for the challenges of the last century. But probably the answer is yes, you are. This is what the statistics are showing. Because most of those popular models tend to be out of date. So we need somebody who is up to date. They have the right technology to address the current challenges. Passion on its own is not enough. If you can match your passion with expertise, that's a whole new level. The second member of the dark triad, guess and hope-based solutions. It's hard to optimize something we cannot see. Now, if you look at courses based on how useful and entertaining they are, and you ask the providers, more than 3 billion in 1 second, they would say that mine is top of the game. Very useful, very entertaining. Probably. But if you face reality and we look at the data, it turns out that they are not very useful and barely entertaining. And that is not just me saying it, because I promise that whatever I say here, I can back it up. So if you look at, for example, the research from the MIT Sloan Management Review, 2014, they wanted to understand why the leadership trainings are failing and risking companies in the US. And it was really clear. Because most of them are based on their evaluation is based on how entertaining they were, how much information they provided. But nobody measured the impact on the people who matter the most, the team. Nobody had a look at the trajectory of the career. And often the decision was based on the packaging. It's almost like a corporate Tinder profile. Fantastic, I like it. It sounds good. But is it useful? The statistics show, no, they're not. So you spend a lot of money, and the only party that benefits from it is the company that is selling it, not the ones who are buying it. And that's kind of unethical. And that's the reason why I do this webinar every single month, so people can ask better questions, so they can make better decisions. And for example, one of our wonderful partners, Baiba, had this white paper last year, and she interviewed companies in the UK, ranging from startups all the way to enterprise level entities. And it turned out that they are facing very similar challenges in terms of engagement. And also, they have very similar solutions. So they identified 7 different areas where they can improve and where they are struggling. But here's the interesting thing, that we know that people skills are really important. Engagement is crucial, but only 30% of the companies measured engagement by surveys, and 0% of them measured psychological safety or inclusion. That's kind of crazy. And that's the problem with that often the employee engagement programs just assume that I know what the problem is. But here's the question: are you entertaining or engaging the employees? Are you offering a solution to fix a problem that is not the real issue? And yes, there is an answer to that. So the latest research showed exactly that they had a look at the most popular, more than 90 different employee engagement programs. And it turned out that only one of them had some kind of positive benefit, and that was the volunteer work. The rest didn't. So there's a huge difference between entertaining and engaging employees, addressing the symptom or the root cause of the problem. And nobody's benefiting from it except for the companies that are selling it. And that is the guess and hope-based solutions, offering solution for something that is not the real issue. So you're not getting the results that you're hoping and paying for. That's the challenge. The third member of the dark triad feels good, but makes no different solutions. Mistaking familiarity and the price of solutions with their efficiency. This is a very typical problem. How many companies, how many people are craving growth mindset? How many of them claim that I have it? Which is a fantastic feeling. But if you ask even Carol Dweck, who came up with this idea, she made it very clear. If you don't have the right environment, if they don't recognize your potential, if the culture is not nurturing and psychologically safe, thinking positive and believing that you have growth mindset means nothing. And this is from the creator of growth mindset. But of course, companies buy it because, yeah, it feels good. Did it make any difference? No, it didn't. It was good to entertain people. It didn't engage them. Was it a good investment? Probably it wasn't. And a lot of courses are like this. I remember a story when, for example, when I was young, then we used to buy lottery tickets. And my dad used to tell me that, that's the tax on stupids. But that was when we were queuing to buy a lottery ticket. But, other people were stupid, but no, because we had a plan. We had a plan because we had, numbers based on birthdays and other superstitions. And we never won, technically. But, it just stuck with me that it's a tax on stupid people, because you feel that you're making progress, that you're doing something. There is a hope. There is a chance that something is going to happen. And in a way, the dark triad of future risking solutions are the corporate lottery. Outdated programs without data that make you feel good, but no actual ROI or progress can be measured. It's pretty much the same thing. You think that you're doing something positive, and maybe your intention is good, but the outcome is not. And that is unfair on the people, because it's gambling, but it's gambling with the lives of the people. And that is unfair. And it's not even the company's fault, but the ones who are selling the future risking solutions. So how could you get ahead of 99% of leaders and organizations? That's the real question. Let's talk about corporate evolution, because it's such a fancy word. And people love that. And it's so empowering until you understand how evolution works. It's not about growing a new pair of wings because, that's the new thing. No. In nature, evolution is about the old models that die out. And the ones who were lucky enough to be born with new kind of functions or mutations that were more adaptable to the new environment, they survived. The rest died out. And corporate evolution is very similar. If you don't keep up, you will disappear. And the successful companies focus on people, but the declining ones focus on technology. because that's what they can see. That's what they understand. They don't understand people. If something you cannot see, you cannot measure it, then it doesn't exist for most people. It's just some voodoo stuff. Be nice to people. Yeah, not now. We have technology to fix. But successful companies realize that people skills are not optional. There's nothing soft about them. The only soft thing is the name, because in the 60s, when American psychologists were asked to develop programs for the US Army, then they had to come up with a different term. And they called them soft skills because it had nothing to do with guns and machines. But it doesn't mean it's optional, not at all. So technically, there are two types of leaders. We have the ones who have common sense. They think that, you know what, I can manage and lead people based on what I need and what I like. The future is just a slightly different version of the past. And the best practices are still okay. We just have to try it harder. You know, when you don't speak a language, you just shout, because that's going to help. But there is a new generation of leaders, the ones with uncommon sense. They know that people are unique, but predictably different. They know that new challenges require new solutions. They know that nowadays problems are so complex that you have to tap into collective intelligence. And they know that they need to create the right environment and develop the right skills. Otherwise, they get left behind. So what is the right environment? And what are the right skills? That's the question. So let's back it up. Research shows that the highest level of growth happens when you have high psychological safety, motivation, and cognitive diversity. The three invisible forces that make or break a team. That's the environment that you need for growth. But what are they exactly? So we know that psychological safety is a buzzword. A lot of people talk about it. But as soon as you ask them, how do you actually measure it so you can intentionally and precisely optimize it? They posted an article or a motivational quote. Talking about psychological safety is not going to create it. Passion is not enough. But you know, back in 1788, there was a huge scandal in the UK because people got really pissed off that the minimum age to become a chimney sweeper apprentice was 4 years old. Imagine that. 4 years old kids up on the roof, go, 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 clean the chimney. And then they realized that employers have the duty of care. And that's when they introduced the Chimney Sweeper Act. And then maybe 250 years, bam, they introduced the health and safety regulations. And they are pretty much the same in most countries. And recently, they added a fifth category, the psychosocial one, because they realized that an attack on psychological safety can cause much more harm than a slap in the face. But because so far it was invisible, it was easier to ignore it. That's not the case anymore. That's not an excuse for that. Indeed, Google wanted to understand what is the secret of high-performing teams. Their first idea was, we don't need leaders. It turned out it was a really bad idea. Yes, you do, but you need good ones. And they realized that the number one trait of high-performing teams is psychological safety. It's not optional. So would it make sense to be able to measure it so you can optimize it, or should we just hope for the best? It's not negotiable. That's the foundation. But psychological safety on its own is not enough. We are not a family. You also need motivation. We need to step up. We need the desire to learn, contribute, and get things done. Otherwise, nothing changes. But what is motivation exactly? Daniel Pink had a really interesting take on it. He talks about the evolution of motivation. 1.0 is biological, very primal. Stay alive, make babies. But then we had to learn how to interact with other people, and then we had to upgrade it to motivation 2.0, pain and pleasure principle, carrot and the stick, the extrinsic motivators. Now, the problem is that people are amazing. They get used to everything, which means that you have to punish and you reward people more and more to get the same result. But also the challenge is that when it comes to creativity and strategy, it doesn't work. Indeed, it backfires. And now, because it's service-based industry, you need to tap into Motivation 3.0, the intrinsic motivators, the ones that are coming from inside. When you do something for the process, for the sake of it, not the outcome. But for that, you have to understand people. It's not automatic. Just because something motivates you, maybe the other person cannot stand it. And that's why common sense and good intention can backfire so badly. That's why we need the blueprint of why people think and behave differently. Like Chris Voss said, there's no such thing as logical, only what matters to someone. And once you are able to connect your message to somebody's highest values, then you can influence them. That's when you have real impact on people. Otherwise, the message gets lost. So if there is a team that scores high on psychological safety and motivation, then they are in the growth zone. If they're in the top 25% of both, that's the high performance zone. But like Netflix made it really clear, we are not a family. We are a high-performing professional team. And the reason is that, you don't put your kids on furlough when they are lazy. A business is not a family. It is safe, but also motivating. And if you are lacking everything, that leads to disengagement. They are in the apathy. And a lot of companies are in the anxiety zone because there's no safety. They can still make money, but there's a problem with that because they burn out. So as a team, you can be in the growth zone, but we know that numbers are liars. They look scientific, but we know that they can hide the truth, especially averages. Because as a team, they are in the growth zone. But if you look at the individuals, you can see how polarized they are. Some of them are like fish in the water. Others feel rejected and demotivated. Why is that? We can quantify it. We can see that the psychological safety is 64%, motivation 66. Great, statistically not too bad. But when you look at the tension score, we can see how polarized the team is. And here we are not talking about creative tension and all those fancy words. No, how polarized they are. There's nothing creative about being rejected and demotivated. Nothing. At this point, we have no idea what the problem is. I don't think there's an assessment for that. But we can break down psychological safety and motivation into 4 subcategories each. That's 8 altogether. And then we can create meaningful conversations driven by data and rooted in science. Assessments can provide data only, but people have the insights, and we have to combine both. We had a case study where the leadership team, including the CEO, was in the apathy zone. And the symptom was that the health and safety standard depended on who was on shift, who was the leader. And during our program, one of the refineries burned down. So that's not the best case study, but it did happen. On the other side of the spectrum, one of the best case studies was in Indonesia, done by our master trainers. Mining company, they turned psychological safety into physical safety. When they started the program, they had 17 accidents a week, according to the company. And after 3 months, they had 0. They won the most prestigious awards in health and safety because people learned how to care, how to speak up, why it's important to look after each other. It's not optional. We have to create the right environment. But, a lot of trainers and coaches and consultants claim that, oh, my programs are so good. Look at all those testimonials. Yeah, great. But we don't care about that. We care about the results. Can you prove that you are good? This is what our partner did in the Netherlands, Philomena. She was working with a company. It's more than 100 years old. Around 80% of the people left because there was so much pressure, they couldn't make a decision. And she was working with them for 6 months. She could improve the results. It's not based on, how do you feel? You good? No, based on numbers, because we have to measure it. And she improved psychological safety by 23%. There was less tension and motivation went up as well. She can demonstrate it. This is the level of transparency that we can provide. It's not about just promising, but measuring it. And then we can break it down and we can see that it improved everywhere except for inclusivity. There's more tension. Autonomy, there's more tension. Let's dig deeper. It doesn't get more practical than that. It has to be practical. It has to be uncomplicated, but also it has to be transparent. If you settle down for less, then chances are that you are using one of the dark triad of future risking solutions. We have to raise standards because we are playing with lives. And it doesn't mean that everything depends on you, because a lot of things can happen, but now we can measure it. It's a diagnostic tool, and then we can adjust the approach accordingly. But if you want to take it to the next level, then we need cognitive diversity. That's the difficult one. The immune system of a team, the way people think, the way they process information. The uncomfortable one, because when people disagree with you, nobody likes that. I don't like it, but that's exactly where the potential lies for success or disaster. But usually there are three options in a team, and you can tell me which one you recognize or which one you experienced as a leader, as a team member, or as a coach. Option one, you have a complex issue, a wonderful boss called Tom, and Tom employs smart people, but he doesn't know about homophilic diversity, which means that we like and trust people who are similar to us. So that means that you can have a team that is individually really smart, but collectively blind, because they have a huge blind spot. It's like we can all agree that the earth is flat. It doesn't make it flat. But it's a good feeling that you agree with me. Option two, complex issue. Tom is still the boss. Tom employs now smart people who also think differently. So there's a high level of cognitive diversity. Is it good for the business? Not necessarily, because it can turn into a bloodbath. It means that you have people who think and behave very differently. That can get really messy. Option three, Tom is still the boss, but not a good one. He's way too dominant, so whatever he says goes, and people quickly learn, don't speak up, don't bring up an idea, don't give negative feedback, hide all the mistakes, they conform to the norms, and they lose the power of diversity. And probably these people burn out. So how would you rank? Which is the most relevant to you? Which one have you experienced the most? If you put it in the chat. 1, 2, or 3. Option was homophilic diversity, similar people, dominant, 1 and 3, 1, 1. And you know what? That is absolutely normal. Why would you employ somebody who annoys you? Somebody who disagrees with you? You don't need that person in your life. That's the issue with that. And that's why I think only one of you mentioned two a little bit. It's very rare. It's really rare, and we have the data. So I show you something interesting. So that's one of our older case studies, 10 senior leaders from 8 different countries, seemingly really diverse. So if you look at the intercultural models, then they would have a blast. But if you look at the cognitive diversity, 22%, which means that if you look at the sliding scales as a range of perspectives and approaches to problems and opportunities, only 22% is covered. That means all the 10 people are within this range. They are kind of scarily similar inside. Of course they get along, but that means that the blind spot is huge. Can they make the best decision? Very unlikely. They can all agree, it feels right, it doesn't make it true. But when it comes to teams, then a lot of potential is lost, and that's exactly what the 3 circle partners wanted to find out. How much potential is lost? So they gave an individual assessment to each member of the team. They scored them individually, and then they had to submit one collectively. What you see here, the blue number, that's the team result. The green one is the best possible individual result. There's a huge gap. They repeated it hundreds of times, and then the average was 79%. That's how much potential is lost in a team. 79 is the average. So when you ask your client, is that your number, or is it 90, or is it 50? But what you can guarantee is that they have a lot of potential left on the table because of the interaction gap, because people clash, because people misunderstand each other. It's all about people skills. And to be honest, this is exactly what our partners realized. So we work with VC companies as well, because they realize that even though they specialize in tech and they invest a lot of money, it means nothing if the project fails because of the people. That's the strong USP. It's all about people. Technology is improving. Technology can replace a lot of people, but not teams. So if you cannot create the right environment, then probably the project is going to struggle. So here's the real question. Where is your team? In which of the 4 stages of growth or decline, depending on how they score on the 3 invisible forces? Are they in the growth stage, when they score high on all the 3 invisible forces? Maybe tunnel vision when they are lacking cognitive diversity? Maybe the rat race when they have only motivation? Or they heading towards game over? Where is your team? Now you can make a more informed decision instead of just hoping for the best. And maybe sometimes people get offended by data, but I think it's much worse when the project fails and people lose their job. That's much worse. You can step on the scale and you can hit the high number, or you can go on a diet. It's a choice. But like this, it's not magic anymore. So we know that this is the right environment, but how do you make it work? What are the skills that you need? Cultural intelligence, the ability to turn differences into synergy instead of painful liability. But here's the question. What is your definition of cultural intelligence? If you can put it in the chat. What is your concise definition of cultural intelligence? Because again, it's a fancy term. We use it every day. But what does it mean to you? The ability to understand and respond to differences. Yeah. What else? I think officially there are thousands and thousands, but what's yours? Because often we use the same word, but we have very different definitions and they create very different expectations. Adjust language to each employee while interacting with him or her. When the company learns from every viewpoint and adapt to situations. Clear framework, make CQ visible. We prefer ICQ, but yes. Would say capability to adopt behavior, perspective. Yep. Respect people, trust them. So, even if you talk about respect and trust, it sounds so obvious and objective, but we don't realize how subjective that is. How do you express respect? How do you gain trust? That's very personal. So I'm going to show you something. So technically, there are 2 main approaches to understanding people. The first one is intercultural solutions, explaining what's normal and expected in a country. This is what most people think about when you mention the word culture. 5 do's and don'ts in different countries, which can be useful. But if you look at up-to-date research, you realize why that is so misleading. Because more than 80% of cultural differences exist within countries, not between them. We all belong to 15 or 20 culture groups at the same time. And the poorest container of culture are country of origin, gender, and generation. Yet, how many people claim that I'm an expert in millennials? Really, what else? What else are you selling when you run out of snake oil? Understanding that, we face different challenges, that is true. But when it comes to individuals, you cannot predict an individual's ways and beliefs based on the country of origin. That has nothing to do with science. Anybody can look it up. So when you see fancy charts saying that, no, this is how people get things done across cultures, meaning nationalities, that's how people think. That has nothing to do with science. How people behave, what they have to conform to, yes, that makes sense. But pretending that you can understand individuals based on the country of origin, gender, or generation, that has nothing to do with science. You cannot create a high-performing team based on passports because they can be misleading. Yes, look at the demographics, fantastic. They are very similar, yes, on paper. But immediately we can say, no, but they are just, outliers. Yeah, like most of the people. Because more than 80% of cultural differences exist within countries, not between them. And we have also a lot of case studies. This is one of those. Big German company employed a lot of Brazilian engineers, and we had to create a high-performing team. Of course, we can start with the typical Brazilian and German approach to highlight the differences. But when you look at the Brazilian engineers, it turned out that on a cognitive level, they were much more German than most Germans. They even left Brazil because it was too messy for them. So they ended up in the right environment in terms of profession and also country. And yes, they have to learn how to buy a bus ticket, yes. But on a cognitive level, this was like a psychological permission for them that, yes, that's the right environment. So if we just stick to the international models and we highlight the statistically average national differences that don't even apply on individual level, we just make the situation much worse. Let's not guess. Let's use data. Because people are not the nationalities. The other approach to understanding people is psychometric models explaining how different personality types tend to behave. Fantastic. But imagine there's this beautiful sunflower, and then you just profile it so hard that you know every little piece on it. But where do you plant it? Do you put it in the snow? You put it in the desert? In the jungle? Or in the right environment? Depending on where you put this sunflower, you're going to get really different results. Why is it important? Because you don't exist in isolation. That's why. Because your personality determines how we want to behave, but culture or your environment determines how you have to behave. Personal preferences are stable, yes, but behavior depends on the situation. So it's nice to talk about, psychometric models that I'm blue, you red. What happened? Nothing. We managed to widen the gap for no reason. How do you escape your personality trap? That's the question. And that's the reason why we have to focus on one operating system and many applications. That's exactly what Global Disk can do. It's a 21st century model. It's a blueprint of why people think and behave differently. It removes the illusion of separation between personalities and cultures. You use the same vocabulary and terminology across all personalities and cultures because everything is relative. It deep dives into your mindset. It explains what you do, your personality type, and your cultural orientation based on your preferences. Then it goes into your natural communication and behavioral style. But most importantly, why? What are those underlying values and drivers? What do you consider true that something feels right? 95% of our actions are driven by values and beliefs we are not even aware of. But we think that we are so objective and logical. That's not true. Because once you understand these underlying values and drivers, now we can measure the mindset gap between you and country norms. You and another person. If you are brave enough, you can use it with couples. It's exactly the same principle. We can measure the mindset gap between you and your team. And you realize why you try to motivate your team, but somehow it backfires. There's no more guessing, no more passports. That's not the point. It's about understanding people and dealing with data. So how can you unlock your teams and organizations and your own potential? That's the real question, because now we know about the right skills and the environment as well. So we know that the bucket is leaking, but we don't know where. So what do? We try to fill it up. We know that the potential is lost in a team. We know something is wrong. So we spend more and more on the same solutions. Would it be more sensible to diagnose it so we know where it's leaking so we can fix it? Instead of getting good at filling up the bucket, let's fix it. The highest level of growth is when you stop wasting your potential. Just like this is how we create psychological safety. It's not about doing anything extra. It's about not doing something that can be perceived as a threat. But if the bucket is leaking and you have no idea where it's from, that makes it more difficult. So that's why we have to raise the standards. And if you settle down for less, that's not right. How do we do that? 4 steps. The steps are the same. The content can be different. Step 1 is often missing. Measure it. Take the assessment so we know exactly where we start. You cannot just tell your GPS to take me to a better place if you don't know where that is and you don't know where you start. So if we lie about the starting point, or that is just not correct, the journey is not going to be accurate. But the assessments can give you only data. But when you visualize it, when you do the debrief, when you discuss it with the team, you get the insights from the people. And that is really powerful when we deep dive into it. How can you talk about something that you are not aware of? That makes it very difficult. But if we have the vocabulary, you have the data, now we can have a constructive conversation. Not until then. Until then, we can talk about the symptoms only. And we can discuss it with people like me, homophilic diversity, but that is not going to give us the results. And then once we have the data, we have the insights, now we can optimize it. If it's a scalable, self-paced online learning program, if it's coaching, if it's workshop, that's up to you. But now we co-create the next steps. And people tend to appreciate that nobody is patronizing them, but we co-create the next steps with them, because at the end of the day, it's about them. And then we can grow. We can diagnose it again, so we can adjust the approach if it's needed. And these are the strategic leadership skills to future-proof organizations. We need to create the right environment, high psychological safety, motivation, cognitive diversity, and we have to create the right, or develop the right skills. Cultural intelligence, which is not a synonym for international knowledge. That's misleading. If you invested in cultural intelligence and you learned about nationalities only, ask for refund. That's not right. Then you didn't get what you paid for. It's not the same thing. We have to understand our own behaviors, thinking patterns, how to create a swift trust, how to work in a hybrid environment. What is fast teaming exactly? So this is exactly what the ICQ Global Academy is about. So we created more courses, and these are not even courses, but developmental programs, depending on where you start. The Uncommon Mindset Bootcamp is for individuals who had enough of trying harder and harder, but they don't get the results that they deserve. Because it's not about positive thinking. That's not enough. Let's not force it. That's not a solution. That's a path to insanity. Let's understand how our own mindset works, and then we can optimize it. Without it, it's very difficult. But if you are a leader and you want to be ahead of 99% of other leaders who just talk about psychological safety and all the new buzzwords without any actual solutions or evidence-based solution, then let's do this. You can do that. And if you take your career seriously as a leader, the Impactful Leader Program is a 6-week tailor-made program only for leaders. When we deep dive into your biases, your derailers on individual and team level, you learn how to do fast naming, but it starts with your self-awareness. And then you can make a real difference. You can create a real legacy, because we can address all the issues that you've seen before. And the high-performing team development program is the 3-month signature program that includes pretty much all of them. And this is the one that got us 400% better results in a Fortune 200 pharmaceutical company than any of the previous programs. And that is from them directly. It works. So far, most of these programs were available only internally for corporate clients. But this year, in April, we are launching it for the public. The first 3, the high-performing team development, that is only for corporate clients. And it's not just a good idea. It's ICF accredited. We won several awards. It's endorsed by the leading experts in the field of coaching, the intercultural field, and the psychometric field as well. And if you want to read about it, we have a lot of Forbes articles. The latest one was shared by Amy Edmondson, the goddess of psychological safety, and that was about one of our case studies where we used the complete approach. And that is beautiful, that she's willing to do that. And she's much more passionate about the topic itself than her ego. And that's a pretty good sign. That's exactly what we need. And the last thing is this, that this LinkedIn update went viral last year on LinkedIn, because It had more than 1 million views and thousands of people shared it, commented, because it hit a nerve. That confidence doesn't equal competence. Silence does not equal incompetence. Just because somebody is quiet, let's not just write them off like, oh, those introverts, they know nothing. No. Maybe as a leader, you couldn't create the right environment. Maybe you couldn't develop the right skills. And that's the real issue. Because data without stories are powerless, but stories without data are just noise. So stories with data provide insights, increase engagement, shape and fuel growth. That's what we are aiming for. Not about telling people what to do, but it's about co-creating what's next. There's also a link in the chat if somebody would like to know more about it, if you want to join the waitlist, which is for the Impactful Leader program. That's always an option.